Thank you for joining me for another video. Last time we jumped into the judgments of Adam, Eve, and the Nahash. I still think that it's really interesting that God basically just gave Adam and Eve the benefit of the doubt, asked them, hey, what happened? What was going through your mind? That whole thing. But then when it comes to the Nahash, just go. I don't like you. Just go. You're bugging in the entire history of everything that God has actually said that to. So there's that. I think that's interesting. Anyway, so this week we're going to be jumping into the aftermath of that situation. So if you happen to have your copy of the Torah with you, you can turn to chapter 3. We're going to be wrapping up this chapter. We're going to be reading verses 20 through 24 today, and those are the last 4 chapters. I don't know if it's the same in Christian Bibles, if there are only 24 verses in this chapter in Christian Bibles, but we're going according to the Jewish versing. So anyway, verse numbers are slightly different. So verse 20, we're going to jump right into it today. So this is immediately after God gives his judgment to Adam. It says, وَيِكْرَهَ ذَمْ شَمْ إِشْتَوْ حَوَّى. The man called the name of his wife Hawa, Kihi Haythaim, sorry, Kihi Haythaim Kalhai, because she was the mother of all the living. Right? There's a little bit of wordplay that's going on in this that we'll discuss a little bit later on. Verse 21, وَيَعَاسْ هَشَمْ إِلَهِمْ لَآدَمَ وَإِشْتَوْ كَتَنَّوْث or وَيَلْبِشَمْ. So it says that God, Hashem, God, he made for the man and his wife, or for Adam and his wife, Kathanoth or, he made them garments, clothing of skin, and he clothed them. There is one mystical line of thought that says that the skin, the garments of skin, are the actual physical skin of humanity, that God had to conceal the spiritual light with physical skin. We're not going to get too much into that because, again, I'm not really big into mysticism. It's not that I think that it's stupid. It's just that I honestly don't really have a need for it. So there's that. We're just going to get right back into it. We're in verse 22. وَيُمَرَّ شَمْ إِلَهِمْ هَنَ آدَمْ هَيَّا كَأَحَدٍ مِّنْهُ. Hashem, God, said, look, or behold, or now, the man, literally it says, was like one of us. In this case, I think that we could also say that it could also be in the future tense. The past participle. He has become like one of us. One of us, obviously, going back to what we talked about quite a few videos ago, quite a while ago, where God refers to himself in the majestic plural. Completely lost my place here. Knowing good and evil, and now, if he were to reach forth his hand, or to send forth his hand, and he were also to take from the tree of life, and he eats, and perhaps he lives forever. Now, the forever here, it's the word here, la'olam, is spelled without a waw. It's spelled defectively, meaning that it doesn't mean forever. It just means for a very long time. How long was a very long time? Well, I don't know. I mean, let's be honest here. Life expectancy at the time, I mean, you're looking at maybe 30 years. A long time in that case would be maybe 5-10 years. Maybe it meant just another few years. We don't know. الغلام וישלחהו השם אלוהים מגן עדן לעבוד את האדמה אשר לקח משם. And so Hashem, God, sent him forth. He banished him, right, from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. Not especially happy occasion, not an especially exciting occasion. And ויגרש את האדם וישכן מקדם לגן עדן את הקרובים ואת לחות החרב המתהפכת לשמור את דרך עץ החיים. So he says that after God drove out the man, he stationed at the east of the Garden of Eden the Keruvim, right? We're going to talk about the cherubim, right? The Keruvim and the flaming, turning sword. This is just the cool part, right? Lishmor et derech ha'chaim, to guard the way to the tree of life, right? And so that brings us to where we are now. Okay, so there is a lot happening here. There is so much happening that this might actually be a fairly long video, so I'm going to try to speak a little bit quicker. I may skip over a couple of things, I don't know. I just there are so many things I just don't know. So one of the things that I think that is pretty interesting about this particular reading is in verse 20, God tells us that the man named his wife Hawa, right? What it doesn't tell us is that Adam named his wife Hawa, right? First of all, it's interesting that Adam names his wife. Like, didn't her parents give her a name? Or she just go through life as known as the Haisha, the woman? Did she just go through life, as hey you? That would be one crazy name, right? Just go through life. Oh, hey you! Everyone in the village looks like, I mean, come on, that's... Surely she had a name, but Adam here calls her a different name. He calls her by the name Hawa, which means living, right? Why? Because she was Em Kal Hai. She was the mother of all living. Now, let's get back to the fact that Adam's name isn't actually mentioned. It says Ha-Adam. It tells us that the man, as opposed to Adam, named his wife. Why does it tell us that? Well, I don't know. I would think that, using his name would be, common sense, right? And this is why I'm not God. Well, that's not why, but it's part of the reason. But perhaps it's to be understood that this is God, or that this is Adam. Perhaps God wants us to just understand that that this was Adam, without actually mentioning his name. But another thing that it could mean is that Adam and Eve, Eve was so special to God She had a special status that God doesn't even mention her name in the same sentence as his name in this case. Now, he does in chapter 4, which we're going to get into next week, but he doesn't do it, and by he, I'm referring to God. God doesn't mention both of their names in the same verse this week. I just think that's kind of an interesting point, right? But jumping back to the, grab my glasses, take a look at what we're looking at here. So one of the things that it also tells us here is that, in mentioning her name but not his name, is that they were equals, right? To mention her name would basically be the same thing as mentioning his name. Why? Because she was the other half of Adam's soul, as it were, as it appears, right? She's basically the other half of Adam. That's how every good marriage works, right? My wife is the other half of me. In many cases, she is the better half of me. She is certainly much more caring than I am, certainly more empathetic than I am. But at the same time, I have qualities that my wife lacks, or at least doesn't have in as great a concentration as I do. We're not going to talk about what those are because there's no point. Because everyone is different. Every marriage is different. So the dynamic is slightly different in every single marriage, but that's the way that it works. Now, Adam and Eve equals, right? So, how does that work with what God told Eve in last week's reading, where he said that your husband is going to rule over you? Well, what it means is that Adam is going to rule over her. He is in charge in the house, as he was in charge in their tribe, right? Eve, on the other hand, being equal to Adam, both equally human and equal in authority, was actually perhaps more important to the survival of their society than Adam himself was. Now, stay with me. Adam is, you can imagine it like this king-queen dynamic, right? So you've got Adam, who is the king. He's the political leadership. He is responsible for providing for the people. He's responsible for reaching out to other tribes, forging alliances with other tribes in the event of warfare. He is responsible for protection of the tribe. So what is Eve left to do? Well, Eve, we tend to have this image of Eve in our minds that she's just sort of a homemaker, just sort of sitting at home, watching the children, tending house, doing all of those things. And we have that image in our minds because that for centuries has been the ideal in the Western world, where I live, and most of you watching this probably also live. However, in ancient Israelite society, even in modern Jewish society, modern Samaritan society, and in other Middle Eastern cultures, traditional Middle Eastern cultures, not the Arabicized, not the Islamicized cultures that are out there today, but you look at the Yazidis, the Kurds, the ones who are not Muslim, the ones who are not Christian, the ones who practice their ancestral faith and still maintain the exact same traditions that they've had for God knows how long. You're going to see that in many cases the woman, especially the queen or the leader, the wife of the leader, the wife of the political leader, is perceived really as more of a matriarchal figure. She's perceived as the mother of the people. So while the king may be the father of the people, the queen is the mother of the people. What does that mean? Why? How is that different from how it is in, let's say, the United States? So in the U.S., after centuries of, I don't want to call it oppression, because I wouldn't really fully say it was oppression, because it wasn't necessarily institutionalized to be oppressive, but the norm, let's call it, since the days when the United States was a part of England, back in the, the 18th century, 16th century, I don't know, the 1700s, right? Some point prior to, let's say, 1775 and before, back when the U.S. was still a British colony, women were really sort of second-class citizens. They weren't, okay. Women in the United States did not have the right to vote until like 1920, okay? Why didn't they have the right to vote? Well, because the law at the time said that only landholders could vote in whatever elections came up. That's logical for the time. And unfortunately, what that meant is that women couldn't vote. Naturally, slaves couldn't vote because, they're slaves. Slavery is not a good thing, but it was the reality at the time. And slaves, for obvious reasons, could not vote. So there was some degree of oppression against women, and that really sort of continues today in the modern world, not to the extent that the feminists want you to believe that it does, but it's still the odor of it still lingers to the clothing of Western society. And that's a problem if you are a Jew, if you are a biblically minded individual. Why? Well, because biblically you look at the societies of the Middle East. You look at the Jewish people, you look at the Samaritans, you look at the traditional Kurds, the Zoroastrians, the Yazidis, right? You look at these groups, women are highly respected, right? In Islamic countries, they're worse than 18th century North America, right? They're not just second-class citizens, but they have no rights. In the event that, God forbid, a man wishes to force himself on a woman, she is held liable. It's not funny, but it's unbelievable. That's why I'm chuckling here, because it's unbelievable that it happened. This is in the 21st century. This is still happening out there. You look in Europe, you've got a completely different set of problems. Why? Well, because Christianity, to some extent, did the same thing. Why? I don't know. I don't know. Historically, in the Middle East, the matriarch, the women in general, the matriarch specifically, were essential to the survival of the society because they were the teachers. They were the ones who trained the younger generation, at least in their formative years, in cultural norms. If all the women got together and said, okay, well, we're going to say that the men need to be second-class citizens, all they have to do is teach the children, and in one generation, boom, you've got an entire civilization of Amazons, right? You've got the warriors of Greek mythology, not the rainforest, if I need to, clarify that. So we see that play out all throughout the Torah, right? Where you have this woman figure, this matriarchal figure, who is she is in charge. In many cases, she is in charge. The wives of Jacob uh, fought over Jacob, and they chose which one he would be with. When? Um, why? Because the matriarchs, the women in general, matriarchs specifically, um, was the single most important figure in any Middle Eastern society. She controlled the culture. She controlled what the younger generation believed. And one of the worst possible things to have ever happened in the history of ever, and things happening, is that the West, and certainly in the Islamic world, uh, stripped women of their power. They stripped them of their lofty position. Eve was the queen of the world, if you will. She was, nobody could touch her. Nobody could come close to her. Her husband listened to her. She had full control over what was going on in her tribe, within the tribe, and certainly on individual levels, while her husband was left to maintain, the political situation, to maintain the how do you call it, the defensive situation, provision of food for the people. And so basically you can look at it like the patriarch attends to the physical needs, the tangible needs, whereas the matriarch was there for the non-physical, intangible needs. She was there to be the mother to the people, which is so much more important than being a political figurehead. It's so much more important than being the king. It's so much more important, honestly, than being a father. My kids, they love me, right? I'm a great guy. Who doesn't love me, right? But my kids love their mom as well. And when they get hurt, they don't come to me. They go to their mom. Probably because I'm less. I don't feel it as much. It doesn't hurt me as much as it hurts my wife when my kids get hurt. The exception is the baby, right? So the baby, she prefers me. I have no idea why. I can't, for the life of me, I can't figure it out. But the baby loves it when I hold her. She just loses her mind when my wife holds her sometimes, and it's frankly kind of hilarious. But at the same time, it's a lot of work. But the mother takes care of the intangible, while the father takes care of the tangible. I'm there to provide, the house, the food, the clothing, that sort of thing, right? In fact, the Torah specifically says, these are my duties. But the mother provides warmth. She provides care. She teaches the children what is and is not proper to do. She teaches the children how they should behave when dealing with other people. I'm left to handle the administrative things. She's left to handle the, I say she's left, I help, but, she's left to help develop the children more so than I am. Yes, that's also part of my job, but more so than I am. And the matriarch is just, in Eve's case, that on a grander scale. While Adam, took care of the physical needs of the tribe, food, protection, shelter, clothing, that sort of a thing. Maybe not clothing. I don't really know about that, but maybe not clothing. We see that Eve had a different role. She was the one who took care of the people, not the tribe, the people, the individuals within the tribe. She helped other women. She taught other women. She taught children. She was a mother to every child She was a sister to every woman. Adam, on the other hand, would have been the leader of these people. He would have been the leader of the tribe, but not as absolute a leader as people in the West tend to think, right? So Eve was, in many ways, more important to the survival of society than Adam. So when they tell you, down with the patriarchy, what they're really saying is down with the matriarchy as well, because you can't have a patriarchy without a matriarchy. The two have to go together. And if they don't, there are problems, which we see happening all across Europe right now. We see happening in the United States right now, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand. Dear God, don't get me started on New Zealand. You see, it already has happened in the Middle East. Women are being oppressed. Every country except for Israel, basically. There may be a couple of other exceptions, Morocco, but that whole general Middle East, Northern Africa region, they have stripped because of the influence of Islam, because Muhammad, what he taught, and what's been interpreted that he taught, has really come to oppress women. If you don't believe me, look back at the traditional female clothing in any Islamic culture. Any Islamic country today, look back at the traditional clothing that they wore before Islam became a thing, before it became institutionalized as this is the religion. Look at Iran. Back in the 70s, prior to the Islamic Revolution, look at Iran. Look at what the women wore. Look at what they wear now. Everywhere it's gone, and I hate to say this, but everywhere that it's gone, everywhere that it's become the dominant force, it has destroyed the role of women. Women first, minorities later, right? And we're going to move on. So one of the things, actually, we're not going to move on too far. So one of the things that's interesting is in verse 20, it tells us that Eve, Adam gave her name, right? But when it says she was the mother of all the living, in the Hebrew, it's spelled he. Okay, and this is a confusing part, right? So in Hebrew, the word for she is he, and that's why it's confusing. And the word for he, the masculine pronoun he, is who, right? So the word he, the feminine pronoun he, she, in this case is spelled who. There's a difference of one letter, but it's important, and it's there to teach us a very important lesson. When it says that she was the mother of all the living, it spells she in the same way that it would the word for he, which tells us that she was the mother of all people who were living, like her and her husband. They were living in the sense that they had reached a point in their spirituality where they were able to recognize their creator. And I just think that's really just a very interesting point, very interesting thing to notice. Now, we're going to jump to verse 21 right quick. So one of the things that the mystics will point out, I'm not a mystic, I've said this plenty of times before, I'm not a mystic. I like learning mystical teachings because I think that they're interesting. I think that they're very cool stuff. In general, a little bit weird once you get too deep into it, but it's it is what it is. It's mysticism. Mysticism's always a little bit weird, right? So one of the things that the mystics teach in regards to the clothing that God gives them is the Hebrew of it says that he gave them kathnoth or, that word or spelled with an ayn for the first But the mystics say, well, don't read katanoth or, read katanoth or, right? Don't read it or, read it or. The difference being that very first letter. In or, the way that it's written in the Torah, it begins with the letter ran. Okay, in or it begins with the letter aleph. Right. The difference is a slight pronunciation. Okay, but the meaning is completely different, right? So you have whereas before I mentioned, that some mystics will teach that, Katanoth or, their skin, he gave them skin, he clothed them in skin to conceal their light. That's that idea, right? So other mystics, and this one is actually much more prominent, it's out there, all across the internet. And you're going to find this in, if you go to any Chabad synagogue, this is probably actually going to be the very first thing that any rabbi is going to tell you it means. You should look at it as if it were spelled with an aleph, that God clothed them with garments of light. Cool, right? Right? Now, while it might appear that these two are contradictory, these two mystical traditions are contradictory, where one is he's clothing them with skin, which is what the text specifically tells us. In the other one, he's clothing them with light. The first one, where it's clothing of skin, he's hiding their inner spiritual light. The second one, where he clothes them with garments of light, he is hiding their physicality and allowing their spirituality to shine through. And I think that the mystics were onto something with that one. I don't think that I wouldn't take it near as far as they do, right? But I do like where they're going with that. And so here's my take on that. God clothes them with garments of light. Okay? Obviously, that doesn't happen in the literal meaning of the text, the plain literal meaning. He gives them leather clothing to wear, right? They start wearing leather. They're jumping around like cavemen, in that leather mastodon clothing. I don't know. I'm imagining the Flintstones. I don't know what it was like. I wasn't there today. Might have been there before. I don't know. If the whole reincarnation thing is true, maybe I was there. I don't know. But metaphorically, then, we could say that God did clothe them with garments of light, but it wasn't to the full extent that the mystics would have you believe. No, their spirituality, their religious beliefs became as obvious to everyone around them as the clothing they were wearing. So that's my take on that, and that's really sort of a, let's call it a demystification of the mystical teaching, if I can get away with saying that. I know in general you probably shouldn't demysticize something that is meant to be mystical, but let's call it for what it is. It became obvious as what they were wearing, that they didn't worship the same way they did before. They weren't the same people that they were before. They were completely different. They were spiritual beings in physical garments, physical bodies, but they worshipped their creator. They perceived that there was a creator. They had reached spiritual height that, to borrow terminology from rabbinical tradition, if they did not have it, they would have died. Their souls would have ascended. They would have, they were so holy, so to speak, that they would have just ascended to heaven right then and there. Not that heaven is the goal. Heaven's never the goal. It's just kind of a nice afterthought, if you will, right? We're going to next couple of verses, and we're going to look at the uh, last verse or two. So God exiles them, right? He sends them out. Why? Why does it tell us that he exiles them? Well, because what if Adam reaches out his hand and takes from the tree of life and he eats it and he lives forever, right? But as I mentioned before, not really forever, just like a really long time forever, like when my kids are saying, come on, let's go, it's taking forever. They don't really mean it's taking forever. They mean this is taking a very long time, right? Same thing existed in ancient times, which is why the text here spells the word le'olam, forever, in a defective way, to tell you, no, it's not forever. It's just, this is a metaphor. This is this is not literal forever. This is just, it's an expression. This is just how do you call it in English? A figure of speech. But God exiles them, they leave, and God places at the entrance to the garden, because apparently there was one entrance, I guess, I don't know, perhaps it was a mountain pass. In fact, I'm convinced that's probably the easiest way to get there. So they leave the garden, and God places at the entrance to the garden two things that just frighten them so much that not only do they leave, but they never go back, right? And those two things, the text tells us, are the cheruvim, these cherubim, right? And the flaming, turning sword, right? So very briefly, we're going to talk about those. So the cheruvim, people envision them as these angels, wings and whatnot. That's a later tradition. I think that the most reasonable way to look at it, the most rational, certainly that's what I'm most concerned with, is rationalism. Is not that God sent angels, in the traditional sense, to guard the way to the garden. Because I don't believe in angels in the traditional sense, right? In fact, I would actually go so far as to say that angels in the traditional sense, in the sense that Christians think of angels, in the sense that Muslims think of angels, in the sense that many Jews think of angels, where they're these independent beings with their own independent thought, but they're not human, but they're not divine, but they're not, they're just kind of somewhere in between. I actually suspect that that's actually a remnant of the pre-Torah polytheistic beliefs of my ancestors. It just kind of stuck around because, well, why not, right? And because of stories like this that really sort of help to reinforce it, right? So I don't think that these are angelic beings. Because in my mind, the book of Psalms very plainly points out that angels are the forces of nature, right? And the Rambam, Maimonides, he very plainly makes that exact same point. Guy was absolutely brilliant. If you ever get a chance, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, Maimonides, the guy was absolutely brilliant. Read his Guide for the Perplexed. It's brilliant stuff. If you're Jewish, read his Mishneh Torah. Absolutely brilliant. Very well done. Very well written. Nothing else compares to it, in my opinion. And if you have a different opinion, you're wrong. What could I say? I'm joking. If you have a different opinion, okay. But the guy was brilliant. Centuries ahead of his time. Absolutely brilliant. But, he was limited, of course. We all are. So he wasn't perfect. But he was a smart guy. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So these cheruvim that are at the entrance to the garden, they're not angelic beings. No, these are people. This is something much more down to earth, something much more rational, something much more physical, something much more tangible. Because frankly, an angel is not going to scare these people. Why? Because I mean they had just been through hell and back. They had just been scared by God Himself. Hard to follow up that act, right? When God scares you, nothing else can, right? Hard to follow that. It's like second place in the strongman competition. Like for me, yeah, I'm a little intimidated by the second place, right? But I'm really intimidated by the first place guy because, dude, for real, man. No, just hi, I'm Judah. I'm a nice guy. Can you be a nice guy to me? That sort of a thing, right? Second place, he's just sort of like, we can't all win, Says the man who wouldn't even make the list, I suspect that these cheruvim were a people. These were a tribe, most likely an aggressive, very warlike tribe. In fact, according to David Rohl, who I've mentioned before, the the village of Kheruabad in Iran, in the Ardabil province of Iran, is named for them, and it literally translates to something like the place of the Kheru, right? Today it's called Helabad, which appears to be sort of an updating of the name. It's like a York, New York sort of a thing, only, without the exact same name because it's a slightly different language. But this was an aggressive, warlike people. What makes me think that? Well, because later traditions, once we leave behind the mythicism and the mysticism, once we leave behind everything that we were taught about these guys being angels, we can look at it from a more mundane approach. So you have this people who is very aggressive, right? And later Jewish tradition certainly sees them as agents of both destruction and justice. Also in chapter 1 of Ezekiel, it's the vehicle for God's presence. They are described as being winged. Why? Well, perhaps the ancient Kheru people, or whatever they were called, their exact name is now just lost to history. Apparently their descendants, though, still remember them. They still remember some remnant of who they were. They probably don't remember that they chased my ancestors off, but that's not important. Where was I even going with that? Oh yeah, so they're seen as destructive. They're seen as agents of justice. They're seen as the vehicle of God's presence. If you look in other religious traditions, in the ancient world, the Assyrians, the Sumerians, right, groups like that, you're going to see that in some they're seen as protective spirits. In some they're sort of a lesser degree of divinity. And in some, they're just outright demons, and that really sort of tells you everything you need to know right there. It tells you why in Judaism we see them as being agents of both destruction and God's justice. You have some who say they're protective, and you have others who say they're demons. That's why. Because all of these things can actually be the exact same thing, right? So their demise is something that we don't really remember. But it is sort of sad because I would have loved to have known more about them. There's a lot that we just don't know because this is in the era of prehistory. Now, Moving on to the last thing that I wanted to talk about is the flaming turning sword, right? So a lot of the English text, the English text makes it sound as if these cherubim, these cherubim, are wielding the flaming ever-turning sword, right? Not the case. In the Hebrew, it makes it clear that these are two distinct things, right? You have the cherubim over here, they show up, and then there's also this flaming turning sword, right? So what is this flaming turning sword? Well, I think that the most reasonable thing to do is to look at what it could be, and that'll probably tell us what it is. Once we've demysticized and demythicized the story. I don't believe that we're talking about a flaming turning sword at all. You look at that description, and that really sounds like sort of a poetic way, or a literal way, that one in the ancient world would have called. And in fact, if you look at video footage of a bolt of lightning today, you slow it down a lot, you're going to see that it turns. You're going to see that it ignites everything it touches. And in fact, it really sort of resembles a sword. It really sort of resembles a flaming sword. So I think it's pretty clear that we're talking about lightning. It was the cheru, these cheruvim, that scared the Adamite tribe off. But it was the lightning that kept them away. And with that, I'm going to end chapter 3. I'm not ending it. God ended it. I'm going to end it here and just let you ponder that for a while. If you enjoyed this video, please show that by hitting the like button. If you are not already subscribed to this channel, please hit the subscribe button and go ahead and turn on the notifications for this channel so that you get to see my pretty face every time I put out a new video. If you are on Facebook, I am too. Wonderful. We should totally be friends, bro. Now, come look for me. Search for an unorthodox Jew. Find me. I'm there, I promise. And we can correspond with each other. You can comment on the stuff. You can like and or follow the page. You can send me a private message if you'd like. I do respond. I will talk to you. I've got one guy that we've been talking basically ever since day one. And he's a pretty good guy. Turns out that he and I, if we lived in the same place, would probably be pretty good friends. I like to meet people. I like to get to know people. I like to hear back from you. Obviously, if you have questions, feel free to ask. You can ask in the comments here on YouTube. You can ask in the comments section on Facebook. If you don't want your question to be public, you can just message me in private and I'll answer you. Maybe I'll respond in a video. You never know. Maybe you'll help me make a video. That being said, I'm done. So, until next time, shalom.